Hello, ladies. I hope that your day is going well. Happy Mother's Day to all of the mothers. And in today's video, I want to talk about spiritual discernment to block struggle love. I've been creating videos for this channel for about 10 months now. And for the past 6 months, I have talked a lot about hypergamy, leveling up, avoiding struggle love. But I think it's very important to talk about the spiritual root of a lot of what we see in terms of the toxicity, the dysfunctional relationships, because there is a spiritual root and how we can address these issues spiritually and avoid becoming embroiled in them. It can become very frustrating looking at these issues of struggle love and how Black women have been exploited. But I think it's very important at the end of the day to really reinforce that it's not about holding on to anger. It is about Black women healing and from us escaping these dynamics that have been so problematic and looking at how we can be healthy in all facets of our lives. So I think it's very important to look at spiritually why so much of this behavior has permeated our community. And it comes down to a lack of a spiritual foundation. What you will see is that in the behaviors that are present and that are evident, the behaviors that are displayed, the behaviors that are promoted and sustained, there is a lack of a genuine connection to God. There is a lack of a concordance with responsibility and with looking out for others' welfare and well-being and looking beyond self, looking beyond what feels good to me and what feels good to me now and how does that impact someone else, or rather not caring how it affects someone else. And so what has happened is that as women, we unfortunately have been groomed to align with men who do not have a spiritual framework. A lot of the behaviors that some men operate out of are really very self-centered, and they are very much about being pleasure-driven and very much about looking at what feels good in the short term. They don't involve strategy, they do not involve responsibility, and they certainly don't align with a spiritual framework. So I think it's very important to underscore how vital it is for us as women to be connected to God. It's important for everyone, but because my main emphasis with this channel is Black women, it's very important for us as a collective to have that spiritual foundation. When we use the spiritual foundation and exercise discernment, it can help prevent us from becoming entangled in relationships that really don't value us, that are not healthy, that are not functional, and that become a huge problem for us, are very problematic, are very dysfunctional, and are not what is best for us spiritually, physically, financially, mentally. So if we are in accordance with God and with wanting to have a life that is healthy and wanting to have a life that has structure and not wanting to operate in chaos consistently, it's very important that we are mindful who we align with. What does the man have as his foundation? If you look at so many relationships that are toxic and dysfunctional, the guiding principles for that relationship are really about valuing him, about valuing a sexual relationship, about valuing his wants and desires, and are very short-term focused. They do not value us. They certainly do not value us spiritually. They don't value us physically. They don't value us emotionally. So whenever you align with someone who does not have a spiritual foundation, or whose foundation is rooted in simply lust and pleasure and fun and irresponsibility, you will not be able to create a fruitful scenario out of that. You cannot create function out of dysfunction. You cannot create peace out of this sort of chaos. So when you're aligned with a man who's simply pleasure driven, lust driven, looking to be with as many women as possible, not wanting to settle down, not wanting to be monogamous, those relationships bring a lot of heartache, pain, trauma, and drama with them. So I'm a big proponent of celibacy, and it's for a number of reasons: spiritually, physically, certainly, because there's a lot of different diseases out there that are being passed around. And in part, it's because when you have scenarios where men want to be with lots of different women, and they certainly are having unprotected sexual relations with different women concurrently, then it puts you at a lot of risk for being exposed to any number of communicable diseases. In addition, emotionally, when you're involved with a man and there are soul ties that are involved, that are created because of this relationship, it can make it harder to disconnect because of that bond that has happened. And now your oxytocin is involved. And so you get this huge emotional attachment to this person, and it's hard to disconnect. So that's an additional reason that I think it's so important not to get involved in sexual relationships with these men, because of the fact that it can make it difficult to disconnect from a relationship that really shouldn't have started in the first place, because it's not going to be beneficial, it's not going to value you, and it's not going to ultimately be healthy. So if we take that out of the equation, the sexual connection, what we would find is that a lot of these relationships would dissolve very quickly, because frankly, the man is only sexually driven. That is the main objective: sex, money, or sex and money. But certainly if you take sex out of the equation, then that removes the incentive for him to want to perpetrate the semblance of a relationship. So it's very, very important that we have that strong spirituality, and if we don't have it, to strive for that. Because what we will find is that when we recognize our value and recognize our worth, we also don't have to look to these discordant relationships for validation, which ultimately we'll never get, but we don't have that desire to engage in these relationships. These relationships are not going to be relationships that ultimately honor us, that value us, that recognize our worth. They are, you look at this relationship model that has played out so often in the Black community, that is being promoted, where a man is encouraged to be with all of these different women and to not settle down, not be monogamous, not marry. That has a lot of detrimental effects on us as women if we engage in relationships with these men. So it's very important for us, and I will encourage us to definitely focus on our walk with God, focusing on our spirituality and not deviating from that. Because one thing that happens is that people come into our lives, and not everyone is coming into our lives to benefit us, to help us, to enhance us. Some people are a distraction and a detour. And what has happened to so many women is that we have been socialized to please men, to value men, to the extent that we're wanting to please them, and we're wanting to be chosen so very much that we have settled for relationships that are below the standard, that don't meet the criteria. And these men, because they don't have a foundation, because they do not have a relationship with God, when we align with them, we can become off track. We can become detoured because we are aligning with a man who does not have a relationship with God, does not value it, and certainly doesn't value our relationship with God. So what will happen is he will promote behavior that undermines our spiritual foundation. And if we're not strong enough, if we haven't reached that point yet, we can be derailed. We can be derailed because we are looking to this relationship and valuing it so much that we are willing to go against what our values are to secure this relationship. That's why it's very important that we have a firm foundation of recognizing our worth and our value and knowing that we don't have to settle for a relationship, that we don't have to engage in behaviors that don't ultimately value us. It's very important that we know that we don't have to live in a scarcity model. We never have to live in a scarcity model. Rather, reading scriptures, meditating, doing different activities where we can reflect on our value, and in doing activities that help and enhance our spiritual foundation, and then exercising discernment. Because in relationships where we are being encouraged to engage in struggle love, that's going to be discordant. It's not going to line up with what we should be doing. It's not going to line up with what's going to benefit us, short term or long term. It's ultimately not going to enhance our lives. It's not going to be our best interest. So I very much think it's important to promote aligning with a man who values us, respects us, recognizes our worth, and is not looking to exploit us in any sort of way, in any kind of scenario. He's not looking to exploit us or take advantage of us. So when a man is looking to date us, interested in dating us, taking us out on a date, it's very important that we use discernment. And it's very important that we're aligned with God and that we can recognize as we get to know a man, if we choose to go down that road, that we're recognizing when red flags present themselves and not to override them, but to be cognizant. There is a verse, Proverbs 3:5-6. And it says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. So one thing that we can do to help ward off getting into these toxic struggle relationships is to take our time, to perform our due diligence, to not rush into a relationship, to not only use that discernment, but be prayerful in relationships that we're thinking about entering into. Is this someone I should be involved with? Because in this day and age, and it's always been this way, but there are people who present as one thing and they turn out to be another. So there's a bait and switch, there is a Jekyll and Hyde. But if we take our time and really evaluate someone, then we can better scrutinize so that we're not being rushed into a relationship and then ending up in a very problematic scenario that we now have to extricate ourselves from. Better yet, to not enter into it by taking our time. And that's one thing that people that are narcissists or people that are exploiters will do, is that they will be in a big rush to love bomb you or to rush you into a relationship. They want to move very fast because they know that that when you recognize who they truly are, you may very well want to run away. So they try to rush you into the relationship very quickly so that by the time you recognize who they truly are, what their true identity is, you become so involved that it's hard for you to walk away. But your value is such that you don't need to ever be pressed for a relationship. There's no need to ever be in a rush to get into a relationship, because it's far better to take your time, evaluate, see what this man's foundation is and who he truly is. Is he who he says he is, or is he an imposter? And that's what we can find out through taking our time, and especially by not involving sex in the equation, so that we don't get that bond that makes it even harder for us to exit the relationship. But very important to take our time and to be diligent in determining, is this man someone who is a good match for me? Not just sounds like a match, not just appears to be a match, not a match because other people say, but is he truly a good match for me? It's very sad to see so many women, and I've certainly been in a bad relationship or two before. So I can definitely understand that we can become embroiled in relationships that really have no benefit for us and are very troublesome, that can become problematic, a burden. And so that's why I underscore, because I see and have seen and have experienced and have witnessed all of the different things that Black women go through in relationships. And unfortunately, there are so many scenarios that are not healthy. And unfortunately, Black women have been groomed to accept dysfunction and pain and trauma in a relationship as being normal, which it isn't, and healthy, which it certainly is not, and the norm, which it should never be. So it's very important that we advocate for ourselves and that we don't accept these struggle relationships, but we weed these scenarios out from the beginning, that we're very mindful and discerning from the beginning. Because again, a man without a strong spiritual foundation is not going to bring us a good outcome, because he doesn't have that in him and he's not interested in it and he's not desirous of it. One thing that comes with a man who is aligned with God is that he doesn't just look out for himself. He's not irresponsible. He takes accountability. He's not coming to a woman expecting her to take care of him. He's not coming to you asking to move into your home. He's not pushing you into uncomfortable situations. He is not looking to take advantage. There's character and integrity there. And it's very important that we shift the paradigm of what our perception is in terms of a relationship and what it should look like. That we remove this incorrect imagery of what a relationship should look like for a Black woman. That includes being aligned with men that are irresponsible, not accountable, that don't have character and integrity. And I will say, do not have a spiritual foundation. That is incredibly important. Biblically, it says, the steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, and he delights in his way. So he has a desire to follow the principles that have been set forth by God, and he adheres to them. He's not someone who you have to change, because one thing about it is we can't change a man. He has to do that of his own volition. He has to be led to do that of his own accord. So we can't force a man who doesn't have a spiritual foundation into being who we want him to be. He has to choose to do that. But that's something that should have already been decided before he meets us, not after. Because what has happened is that when we have acquiesced to someone without a spiritual foundation, is more often than not, the man not only doesn't change, but it's us that changes. And it's us that goes off track and loses our spiritual footing. So I encourage us as a collective to really look in terms of relationships at spiritual foundation. May we have a firm spiritual foundation and use much discernment, avoid struggle love, continue to level up. Let me know what you think in the comments beneath the video. As always, be blessed. This has been Veronica V, and I will see you in the next video.